The date is May 9th, 1980, Norco, California, a small and quiet town east of Los Angeles. An ordinary Friday afternoon, but within minutes, this quiet place would be transformed into a battlefield filled with shell casings, shattered glass, and blood. This was not a simple bank robbery. This was a declaration of war. An inferno initiated for just $20,000, but one that would forever change the weapons, tactics, and soul of American law enforcement. At the center of this story was a 27-year-old man named George Wayne Smith and his dark belief. Smith identified as a born-again Christian and was convinced the world was on the brink of a total collapse into chaos. He wasn't just concerned, he was obsessed. He spent his nights poring over survivalist literature, apocalyptic prophecies, and conspiracy theories that painted a picture of imminent societal breakdown. He was a survivalist, prepared to do anything to survive this apocalypse. He and his closest friend, Christopher Harvin, were fixated on this idea. They had to build a bunker and stockpile weapons, ammunition, and food. For them, money was not a tool for consumption, but the key to survival in the coming world of chaos. The two men fed off each other's paranoia. While others their age were building careers and families, Smith and Harvin were building an arsenal. They saw themselves not as criminals in waiting, but as realists preparing for the inevitable. This mentality, combined with the failures they experienced in their ordinary lives, dead-end jobs, broken relationships, a sense of being left behind by society, drove them to a dangerous decision, a swift, high-yield robbery. In their twisted logic, they weren't planning to steal, they were planning to secure resources for survival. It was a military operation, not a crime. The crew was joined by Christopher's brother, Russell Harvin, and the Delgado brothers, Belisario and Manuel. They painted a portrait not of professional criminals, but of young men radicalized by conspiracy theories and socially adrift. These weren't hardened gangsters with criminal records. They were mechanics, laborers, ordinary men who'd fallen down a rabbit hole of extremist ideology. For Smith, this robbery was about much more than stealing money. It was a resource-gathering operation for the new world to come and a combat drill for his own small army. In his mind, they were patriots preparing for war, not robbers preparing for prison. They prepared for this day for months. Every detail was planned with military precision. They amassed an arsenal of combat-grade firepower, legally attainable on the civilian market, 5.56mm rifles like the AR-15 and HK-93, more powerful .308 caliber HK-91s, pump-action shotguns, and various handguns. They organized themselves to tape magazines together for rapid reloading in combat, a technique learned from military manuals. They prepared thousands of rounds of ammunition and pipe-style improvised explosive devices, IEDs, that they had built themselves in Smith's garage, testing them in the desert to ensure they worked. Their plan was bold on paper, but flawed in practice. They would set off a small diversionary explosion a mile from the bank to draw emergency services there, then empty the bank in minutes and flee. The getaway vehicle was a van they'd customized with reinforced panels. They'd mapped out escape routes, studied police response times, and rehearsed their movements. They believed they'd thought of everything. However, they overlooked a simple detail: the fact that a bank employee across the street could become suspicious and foil their entire plan with a single phone call. It was this one variable, human unpredictability, that would unravel everything. Around 3:40 p.m., 4 robbers in masks stormed the Security Pacific Bank branch. The fifth member, Belisario Delgado, was behind a getaway van, engine running, eyes scanning the street. Inside, Everything was going according to plan. Commands of everybody on the floor, cash being rapidly stuffed into bags, terrified customers and employees pressed against the cold tile floor. The robbers moved with military efficiency, shouting orders, controlling the room. To the hostages, it seemed like a scene from a movie, surreal, terrifying, and moving at lightning speed. But outside, an employee at the opposite bank had already noticed the situation. Something didn't look right. The way the men moved, the masks, the urgency. She picked up the phone and called the police. The closest unit to respond to the call was Riverside County Sheriff Deputy Glenn Balaski, who happened to be waiting at an intersection just a few hundred yards from the bank. When the call came through, Balaski's heart rate spiked. Bank robbery in progress, suspects possibly armed. He was alone, and backup was minutes away. Making a tactical decision to avoid being an open target in front of the large glass windows, Balaski approached from the side of the bank without his siren. He knew that the element of surprise was his only advantage. As he pulled up, trying to assess the situation, the lookout outside spotted the police car and yelled into his radio, "Police, get out now!" The moment the robbers burst out the door in a panic, all hell broke loose. The instant they saw Balaski, they all opened fire. The sound was deafening. Bullets from the semi-automatic rifles and shotguns ripped through the police car like it was a tin can. The windshield exploded into 1,000 pieces. Metal tore. Glass rained down. Balaski tried to reverse, but crashed into another vehicle and was pinned, trapped. He threw himself out, took cover behind his car door, knowing it offered little protection against rifle rounds, and aimed his standard-issue Remington 870 shotgun and returned fire. At that exact moment, the critical move that upended the robbers' plan was made. As the getaway van accelerated, Belisario Delgado at the wheel, one of Balaski's shotgun blasts struck him in the back of the neck. The van spun out of control and crashed into a fence with a sickening crunch of metal. Delgado slumped forward, dead on the scene. Blood pooled on the steering wheel. The carefully planned escape had just evaporated in seconds. But this did not end the firefight. On the contrary, it intensified it. The 4 remaining robbers, as if to avenge their friend, unleashed a hail of gunfire on Balaski's vehicle. They were no longer thinking about escape. They were thinking about survival and revenge. The air filled with the sharp crack of rifle fire, the acrid smell of gunpowder, and the metallic taste of fear. A later count would find over 40 bullet holes in the car. Under this barrage of fire, Balaski was shot 5 times, including in his face and arms. He could feel the impacts, the burning sensation, the warm blood. He kept fighting, kept returning fire, driven by pure adrenaline and survival instinct. His survival was a miracle. As backup units arrived, one officer laid down cover fire and dragged the critically wounded Balaski to a vehicle, rushing him to the hospital. He would survive, but the physical and psychological scars would last a lifetime. The robbers were now on foot, their primary escape plan destroyed. Desperate and heavily armed, they carjacked a Ford pickup truck waiting at a red light, shoving the terrified driver onto the street. They piled into the truck and fled north out of Norco. The event had now devolved from a robbery into a mobile gun battle, a 40-kilometer rolling battlefield. The Riverside and San Bernardino Sheriff's Departments, along with the California Highway Patrol, gave chase. Every available unit converged on Norco. Radio traffic exploded with urgent calls, coordinates, requests for backup and medical assistance. Hanging from the back and side windows, the assailants rained down continuous fire from their long rifles on the pursuing officers. They weren't just shooting to escape, they were shooting to kill. This was now a war. Brass casings tumbled onto the highway. Muzzle flashes lit up the truck bed. Officers ducked as rounds punctured through windshields, doors, and hoods. Some officers were forced to fall back, their vehicles too damaged to continue. Others pressed forward, knowing that if these men escaped, they might kill again. Here, the grim reality of the day became apparent: range and penetration power. In the 1980s, the standard equipment for an American patrol officer was a .38 caliber revolver and a short-range shotgun. These weapons were like toys against the robbers' military-grade rifles. The .38 revolver had an effective range of maybe 50 yards. The AR-15 could accurately engage targets at 300 yards or more. The robbers could freely open fire on police vehicles from an effective range without any fear of retaliation. Desperate announcements rose over the radio. "They're heavily armed. We can't approach." This asymmetric balance of power had turned the pursuit entirely in favor of the attackers. More than 30 police vehicles were hit. A helicopter was struck and forced to make an emergency landing. Improvised explosive devices thrown onto the road further increased the chaos. The pursuit veered onto a mountainous road in Lytle Creek. The robbers abandoned their truck and spread across the rocky terrain, setting up an ambush. They weren't thieves, they were soldiers at war with the state. They had trained for this. The first patrol car belonged to Deputy Sheriff James B. Evans, a Vietnam veteran. The moment he entered their line of sight, his vehicle was caught in a crossfire. A bullet pierced his helmet and hit him in the head. He died instantly. He left behind a wife and 6 children. Other units were trapped at a disadvantage. The robbers had the high ground, superior firepower, and the element of surprise. At this moment, Deputy Sheriff D.J. McCarty arrived at the scene. He had taken a seized M16 rifle from the evidence room. Despite being wounded by ambush fire, he began laying down suppressive fire with the M16. For the first time, the robbers were being outgunned. As darkness fell, they were forced to flee into the depths of the forest. McCarty's decision likely saved many lives that day. The next morning, the area was surrounded by hundreds of law enforcement personnel. Around noon, George Smith, Christopher, and Russell Harvin were captured in an exhausted state. Manuel Delgado, however, refused to surrender and was killed in the ensuing firefight. The Norco 3 were tried for murder, kidnapping, and numerous other crimes. Ultimately, all 3 were sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Norco's toll was heavy. 2 attackers and Deputy Sheriff James Evans died. 8 officers were shot. But the real wound was invisible. Most of the officers who were there lived with nightmares and post-traumatic stress disorder for years. This became known as Norco syndrome, the traumatic awakening when police realized they were lethally vulnerable and defenseless. Many people attribute the militarization of police to the famous 1997 North Hollywood shootout, but the real revolution began 17 years earlier in Norco. Because the incident occurred before the era of live broadcasting, it never truly found its deserved place in national memory. After Norco, departments began equipping patrol cars with rifles like the AR-15. Training was fundamentally changed. Officers were now trained to survive military-style confrontations. Norco became a case study in police academies. Every officer learned this lesson: never again be outgunned. Norco wasn't a simple robbery, it was a turning point. The price paid that day placed steel vests under police uniforms and assault rifles in patrol cars. The line between police officer and soldier blurred. America's law enforcement would never be the same again.